Hello, everyone. My name is Hadiya Giwa, and I'm excited to be moderating this very relevant discussion amidst the protests and ongoing movement surrounding George Floyd and the many other Black victims of racism. As the Wooster Islamic Center's Youth Sisters Coordinator and an active member of the Muslim community, it has always been a priority to create a welcoming environment for everyone through multiple events and programming. However, I think we can all agree that regardless of faith, people want to know how to channel their feelings into positive energy to help eradicate these barriers that our society is still facing. So first, I would like to take a moment to introduce our very distinguished panelists, starting off with Dr. Tony. Dr. Tony Menelik van der Meer has a PhD and is a community activist, organizer, and teacher. He has served as president of the Boston Black Political Task Force and the Boston Pan-African Forum. He has also served as a local advisor to the Boston Black Lives Matter movement. Dr. van der Meer has been teaching for the past 25 years at UMass Boston, where he is a senior lecturer in the Africana Studies Department. He was an African American Studies major during his undergraduate years at Northeastern University. He received his MS in Community Economic Development from the Graduate School of Business at New Hampshire College and received his MA and PhD in Leadership and Change from Antioch University. Dr. van der Meer is the co-editor of the book State of the Race, Creating Our 21st Century and Where Do We Go From Here in 2004. Dr. van der Meer is also an Ifa priest in the Yoruba Ifa and Orisa belief system. The king of Ile-Ife in Nigeria gave Dr. van der Meer the title of Asoju Esin Ati Asa Yoruba, ambassador of Yoruba religion and culture. Moving on to our next panelist, we have Rabbi Moshe Libero, who is a third-generation Wooster rabbi who serves as the associate rabbi of the Torah Center of Wooster. Rabbi Libero has had the opportunity to serve Jewish communities around the world from the Australian outback and Buenos Aires to Atlanta, Georgia. In 2012, he was ordained as a rabbi by the chief rabbi of Toronto's Rabbinical Court. In the spring of 2017, he was further ordained by the chief rabbinate of Israel in matters of Jewish marriage. Rabbi Libero coordinates various programs connecting Jewish students on Worcester's college campuses. Next, I will introduce Reverend Brent Newberry, who has served as the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Worcester since 2015. Originally from the South, he grew up in Florida and Mississippi, as well as a time in Texas during seminary. He holds a Master of Divinity degree from Baylor University, and he is currently pursuing a Doctor of Ministry degree from Boston University School of Theology. In his spare time, Brent enjoys reading, writing, watching Netflix, photography, taking walks with his dog, and spending time with friends. And last, we have Imam Dr. Asif Hirani, who completed his Bachelor's of Business Administration in Fashion Designing before switching gears to the pursuit of Islamic Studies from Karachi University, and attained his PhD from El Medina International University in Tafsir and Quranic knowledge. He is the author of several books in multiple languages, including Principles of Men and Women Interaction in Islam and Tafsir of Surah Yusuf from Psychological Perspective. He is currently serving as a resident scholar of the Wooster Islamic Center in Massachusetts. So it is without further ado that I welcome all the panelists and all the viewers. Please note that there will be a chance for Q&A at the end, so make sure that you feel free to ask questions through that feature. We will do our best with the time to address as many as we can at the end. So to guide this discussion, we have prepared some questions, and I would like to start off with Dr. Tony. So as a leader, as a clergy, and a fellow human being, how do you feel about the incident with Floyd in Minneapolis, and how does it dictate where you stand with the current movement against racism?
Well, obviously, I feel horrible about it. Can you hear me clearly? Can you hear me? Okay. Obviously, I feel horrible about it, but it's an indication of where this country is at the moment, and not just within the country, but within the global context. And so it's created not only a teachable moment, but it's created a moment for the people to create a major paradigm shift in how government is dealt with and how people ought to be treated. Whenever a United States president turns the military on its people, we have a fundamental problem. And so it's gone beyond George Floyd, and that he's only a symbol of centuries of injustice and genocide against Black people.
I think those are great points that you make, and I'm going to turn it to the rabbi to add on to that.
Can't hear the rabbi. He's not muted. Muted.
Hi.
Okay, we can hear you.
Was that? I'm sorry. I'm just on my phone. My laptop was giving me a little bit of trouble. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Just Rati, if you can repeat the question again for him.
So the question was, as a leader, as a clergy, and a fellow human being, how do you feel about the incident with George Floyd in Minneapolis, and how does this dictate where you stand with the current movement against racism?
So, first of all, thank you, Imam Asif, for coordinating this vital discussion. If you remember from last time, questions like this, I prefer to answer just as a human being, not as a clergy or a religious leader, but rather as a person. And I think there's actually something beautiful that's going on account of what happened. First of all, I don't feel the need to even express the horror that I felt, and I watched the video, and people in my community that asked me should they watch it, I told them they should watch it, because I believe that in today's day and age, we have a responsibility. When something horrific happens, we have to recognize evil for evil. And something evil took place. And just sitting there and watching one human take the life out of another human being is horrific. But in every painful situation, we need to learn to grow. And the growth that's coming from this horrible tragedy is a global awareness of the value of a human life. In the Jewish tradition, in the Torah, there's a verse, Nasa Adam Tsalmenu Kidmosenu, where it makes reference to the fact that human beings were created B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God. And the sheer global outrage from the fact that the image of God was destroyed, that a simple life was lost. We're not talking about a world leader, nor are we talking about a philanthropist or a celebrity. We're talking about a human being at the most raw and honest and beautiful level of soul. And the fact that there's such a level of outrage, as a global community, we could actually take comfort in the fact that we're headed in the direction where maybe even as far as close back as just a generation ago, humanity did not recognize the value of a human life. And I think in every painful situation, both in our personal lives, in our communal lives, in a global sense, there's always a growth. And our job is to take that growth and channel it forth into the future generations and pass that on. So the appreciation for life is a tremendous upside. And I hope that, through today's discussion and discussions like this in the future, we'll be able to channel that to ourselves, to our families, and to our community.
I hope so too. Reverend Brett, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, thank you again for the opportunity to join you in this discussion. And I mean, absolutely, unequivocally, what happened was horrific and evil. I think what I'm drawn to as both a person and a minister is that this isn't a one-time event. This has been happening, what Dr. Tony was talking about, this has been happening to other Black people for a long, long time. And the injustice that is systemic and oppressive has been in place for centuries. And so there's a prominent Black author named Austin Channing Brown, and she mentioned something yesterday or the day before. She said she just can't get over that George Floyd was killed over a $20 bill. And that's how pervasive and insidious this whole structure is in our society right now. And so Black individuals have been saying for a long time that Black Lives Matter. It didn't just start, that movement didn't just start, it's been ongoing. And so for me, this, it's horrific. It's also a call to become even more engaged and to do work myself individually in learning what it means to engage proactively and not be passive as racist policies are enacted or perpetuated or continued. And so all of that's coming from both a personal and a ministerial place, because as a minister of the Christian tradition, we share part of the same scriptures as the rabbi. And, we believe that all people are made in the image of God. And so when you take a life or when you oppress people, you are not honoring that in others, and that's violent. And so so much of what's going on beyond just the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and keep going, back so much beyond just those lives is at stake and have been harmed. And that's something that we need to speak out about as humans and as Christians. And so, again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak into this moment.
Imam.
Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to thank the panelists for giving time, and thanks to you, Hadia, our WIC Youth Sisters lead. You are doing a tremendous job so far. How do I feel as an Imam, as a Muslim, as an American, as a human being? I felt embarrassed for the incident, and because we were looking at, me and my wife, we were looking at the Boston protest last Sunday, I guess. And usually we don't show these things to our kids, but my 8-year-old daughter came all of a sudden and she saw protest and she was asking me, Abba, she called me Abba. So she said, Abba, what's going on? Why these people are coming out and why there's a chaos? And I have to use a very indirect language to explain it to her. I said that, these people are angry because the police uncle in Minnesota killed Uncle George. And that's why these people are angry. And she asked me a question and she left me speechless. She said, why Uncle George was killed? Why police kill Uncle George? And I was speechless. I was embarrassed. How can I say to her that this person was killed because of his skin color? This is so that's why it's so embarrassing that this happened. And as Reverend said, that this is happening every single day. Obviously, it doesn't make headlines every time. This time it made it. That's why you see the uprising and you see people are coming out. But it's happening every single day. And I'm so glad that we all are together to do something. As Reverend and Rabbi already quoted, that even in the Quran, God says that God honor every human life, regardless of their background, regardless of their faith. So this is how I feel about this.
Yeah, so going off of that unity that is arising from what's happening right now, the next point that I want to make is that we may have different manners in which we practice religion, but regardless of faith, when it comes to combating racism, we should all be united because in reality, it's one race and that's the human race. So with that being said, people want to know as individuals and also as a community what they personally can do to help raise awareness and to combat this racism that we're seeing. I'll start off with Dr. Tony again.
Yes, well, that's a wonderful question. I think the fundamental question is, how do we undo racism? And so on a individual level and on a systemic level. So on the individual level, it requires us to begin to reflect and to address our privileges. We have, all of us each have various privileges. We're privileged to be here today. We're privileged to have a computer to even engage in this discussion. But when it comes to the question of white skin privilege and white supremacy and the people who have power, then people have to recognize that, because this issue has lasted absolutely too long. And even people who deny racism, it says that I didn't start it, but they benefit from it, right? And so the question is for them to educate themselves. Now, what is happening currently is because you see massive protests and demonstrations nationally and globally, people are forced to reckon that it's a problem. So the schools have to do something about it. The institutions have to change, and particularly the churches have to do something about it. So if we speak of God, and we speak of God as being omnipotent, and we can speak that God sees all of us the same, but the problem is we don't see each other the same. Right. The problem is that you got the churches. You have a president who went and desecrated the church to be able to appeal to people within the church to support his backward policies. Right. So we have to be vigilant about how we address this question of how other human beings are treated and stand with them. But we have to be willing to change and to transform and to learn new things about people, and not be locked into our own ways, or ways that our culture has, created, and say that no, we have to live together or we're going to die all together.
That's a great point that you make. And along with being willing to change and being vigilant, there's so many other things that people need to do to step up. So I'm going to turn it to the rabbi to add on and say his take.
So I heard a beautiful story earlier today. One of the greatest Jewish leaders of this past generation was the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson of righteous memory. In 1991, the Jewish community in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, New York, there was horrible riots between the African American community and the Jewish community. And the then mayor of New York City, Mayor Dinkins, came to meet with the Rebbe, as the Rebbe was the leader of a large faction of the community that was involved in this conflict. And he asked the Rebbe for a blessing. And the blessing he asked for was that the two sides should be able to see eye to eye. And the Rebbe looked at him and said, there are no two sides. They're all one, because each and every one of us were created by God. We're all God's creations. And a lot of people like to focus solutions on the macro level, if I may be so bold to suggest the micro level. If each and every one of us, just myself, the Reverend, the Imam, the Professor, Hadia, if each and every one of us made a commitment to work on ourselves, to begin to truly understand that every person we encounter, while we may not look the same as them, and we may not pray the same as them, if we could work and appreciate and begin to look at each and every individual in the world the same way Almighty God looks at the person, then all that we're going to do is it'll be a domino effect of positive action that will affect the world. So I don't, it's not my style to come out with massive statements and, great programs, which are all important and vital, each one in their own sense. But I want to start a grassroots effort, and I want to start it with myself and with my family and with my community. And I'm going to preach that and teach that. And more than anything, my late grandfather used to always say the greatest method of teaching is to lead by example. And I have worked on myself to accept others, even within the Jewish community itself. There's divide everywhere. But if we are able to work and truly understand and allow the message to resonate that every person was created by God, we're already on our way to a solution. And if I may even address the fact that we're having this discussion now, and we're recognizing that there is a need to be fulfilled, and we're recognizing the lacking in this area, that alone is already halfway towards a full solution.
Reverend Brett?
Yeah, I think about, say, in a professional sense, my work, when I have staff members who don't, who have a complaint or something that's not going well, I try to hear it, but I don't always hear it. Or something that I'm doing, if I'm not doing something fair or whatever it may be, hypothetically, I don't always hear it. I feel defensive. There's a power structure at play. If I'm talking to a colleague about what's going on in the staff hypothetical situation, and they say, no, I think you're wrong, sometimes I can hear it better because we're equals in our relationships. And when I think about white supremacy, and I think about the United States right now, and for 400 years, there's been power for white people over oppressing and over Black people. And it's shifted at times with pockets of abolition or integration or civil rights or whatever it may be, but that system continues to remain in place and continues to press down so many different parts of society are interlocked. And so when we think about people who don't think it's a problem if it doesn't affect them, that's where whatever we're talking about today, it's racism, and importantly so. But if it's anything else, it's the people who are aware of what's going on and are equal in that system that can speak into it. So it means that white individuals or people who can pass for white ought to be speaking to their friends about what white privilege is and explaining it and using examples because they're obviously not listening when Black individuals have been trying to tell them for a long, long time. And so that is one way that we can help in this instance, of course, but in other instances too, when we think about coronavirus or whatever it is, the people on the same level, in the same spaces, need to be speaking up in order to help others become aware and accept responsibility.
That's a great point you make. So on top of, speaking to each other, Imam, anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, so beautifully explained by Dr. Tony, Rabbi, and Reverend. I just want to add that the first part of the question, that we have to finish this selfish approach that if it's not affecting me, then I don't care. That mentality actually will bite you. So as I said beautifully by the three panelists before me, that if one community is struggling, it means entire community is struggling, and then entire humanity is struggling. That should be our attitude. So we need to speak up for the rights of others. How to create awareness as a clergy member? I would say the 3-4 steps we can do. First is we need to constantly address this issue in our services, in our sermon. That's what we need to do. Every other topic, every other program should be around a workshop about awareness and this how to anti-racism workshop and so forth, just to create that environment of how to appreciate the diversity. Second, we need to make our congregation diverse and leadership of our place of worship diverse. That's also extremely important. The third point will be constantly these kinds of program will create a lot of awareness, messages on social media, WhatsApp groups. So just to create awareness. And last thing is, as one of the panelists said before me, that as a leader, we need to make this priority and lead from the front, because we are leaders. We have people who follow us from a spiritual perspective. If we were going to speak up, if we were going to lead people from the example, eventually our entire community will going to follow us.
Hadia.
Yes.
I'd like to make an additional comment. I think it's important that we have to work from a micro and a macro level. And that I think it's important that if we look at Dr. Martin Luther King, who did his internal work before he became who he was, who worked with his family, but he had to deal with a system of power. You cannot deny a system of power. right? And that it is around the church. Because if we talk about the separation of church and state, right, we're dealing with two different entities here. And what is the role of the religious community, the faith-based community, in the churches to address this question of power? Yes, from my own people's experience, who are enslaved, right? Who had to deal with themselves and others who they weren't even related to in order to survive to be up to this point, had to do that. But they still had to deal with a system of power on the plantations, power in other institutions, that created the very same situation that brought them here, right? So we have to be very clear and not be naive about that. Is that we have to struggle against power, but we have to do it from a deeply spiritual perspective to bring out the goodness against the profane, bring out the sacred versus the profane, right? That is our task. We cannot forget Dr. Martin Luther King because he's the one that did it. But at the same time, when we talk about someone like Malcolm X, who had a different approach, it didn't make a difference what approach you took because both of them was assassinated by forces of power, right? So we have to be very clear about what's going on.
Yes, and so going off of that, how can specifically faith-based communities work together in striving for a racism-free society and breaking that system of power? I'll start off with Dr. Tony again.
Well, we have to do what Dr. King did, that we have to come together. We have to bring the various religious and spiritual and faith-based groups to demonstrate our unity and stand before the dragons of evil in order to bring about the peace that we need. To be willing to deal with what Dr. King called a dangerous unselfishness, where we're not worried what will happen to us, but if we didn't do anything, what would happen if we did nothing to the people who are suffering? So the church have to demonstrate, and the religious community and the spiritual community have to demonstrate some kind of leadership. As the Imam said, we have to lead by example. And there are not many examples out there, in terms of what the religious community need to deal with. They should be challenging the president. They should be challenging the state. They should be challenging the police commissioners who allow folks to kill Black people with impunity and nothing happened to them, right? They should be on the front lines, around that. When I watched today a news report about this 75-year-old man who was pushed to the ground, by one of these officers, it hurt my heart. And so the governor did something, but it wasn't just an individual incident. Is that they have to do something because it's a systemic question. That's probably what happened to somebody else if we don't do anything to change it. So we have to get the religious community to stand up and demonstrate that we are one in God and be willing to make that sacrifice to say that.
So I'm going to move on to Rabbi Moshe, because I know you have to leave soon, to address the same question, but what faith-based communities can do in striving for a racism-free society.
Thank you for that. Before I just answer this, just like about previous response about...
We can't hear you, Rabbi.
Rabbi, we...
No one hears it. How about now?
Where are you?
If I talk really loud, do you hear me? Okay, perfect. Yes, like Sister Adia mentioned, I do have to, I unfortunately have to get going because of the Sabbath. You can also probably see the hustle and bustle behind me as everyone is. But before I answer this question, I just want to point out that my emphasis on my previous response about starting grassroots level in our own communities was not, God forbid, to take away from the need to start from the top. But everyone on the bottom now is eventually going to be on the top. And it's about educating our youth. They're the future. And it's starting of movement as far down as kindergarten, because one day some kid in kindergarten today is going to be the president of this country, and they're going to be the leaders of society and the world. And if we're able to impart the values that all of us hold near and dear and want to share with the world, the way to truly affect the world is by starting from the ground up. answer this question, and I'm sorry that I'm doing this in haste, the responsibility of faith-based communities for racism, as I see it, is a person of faith is responsible to live their life in today's modern world with the values imparted to them by the beauty and their traditions. In the Torah, God gives 613 commandments to the Jewish people. And to the children of Noah, which is everyone in the world, he gave the 7 Noahide laws, which are the foundation stone of the moral society. They include not to kill, to steal, to honor the sanctity of marriage, to establish courts of justice. Those are 4 or 5 of the 7, and I encourage everyone to study them and pass them out to their community. Our responsibility as people of faith-based communities, people who hold God's presence and God's word near and dear, is to live our lives in the example that our parents and our community taught us before. And you know, all of these answers are sharing this common denominator of great necessity for change. And I can't stress enough, and I speak to myself, that change starts with the individual. And the individual, in the Jewish tradition, there's a saying that every person is an olam maleh, is an entire world. Every person's view that we're able to change, every community that we could change the tide of racism, we are effectively changing the world over and over and over again. So as I go prepare for the Sabbath, the Jewish holy day of rest, it's in our tradition, the Sabbath is referred to as a day of peace and joy and rest. Pray that the peace and tranquility of this Shabbat, this Sabbath, should extend itself to the entire world. And we should all merit through all pain and all suffering. May He, the Creator of peace on high, grant peace and prosperity to all those.
I think I heard most of that. It was a little difficult to hear, actually. But I want to thank Rabbi Moshe again for joining us and discussing this important topic. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I wanted to leave off, we don't need to wait for bad things to happen to get together and discuss ways to join our together. Let's next time get together for something good.
Hopefully, Rabbi, because last time we met for coronavirus, this time we are meeting for this. Hopefully, we'll meet again for a good thing. Thanks, Rabbi.
Yeah, hi. So I'm going to continue on with the same question with Reverend Brent. Again, it was, how can faith-based communities work together in breaking the power system and striving for a racism-free society?
Yeah, I don't know that there is one answer. I think it's sort of casting a wide net of a bunch of different approaches. I think it is the work of our institutions and our congregations to work internally, both as individuals but as congregations, to start these hard conversations, but then also recognizing that we have so much more in common across our various religious traditions than we do that separates us. We have a lot of specific differences, but the overarching, which we emphasized last time we had a panel, the overarching similarities, of loving our neighbors and one another and seeing the image of the divine in one another, like all of that is crossing over so many different traditions. And so if we can find, if we can unite around those, and we already do, this is happening. We did a previous one, for discussion, but Wooster Interfaith, and I see Isabel, the executive director, has been on this on the chat. She's organizing us as faith-based institutions and organizations together regularly, working on different approaches to different issues. Many of them come back to racism, whether it's institutional in our education system or in hiring systems or wherever it may be, voting right now. There are so many different areas that overlap, and having us together regularly is already a good starting point. And so then it requires a lot of courage from each of us who are leaders in our different faith-based communities to stand up. And I was at this at the Monday Black Lives Matter protest, and I saw some other faith leaders, and people were making decisions about health too, that they needed to whether they needed to be home or not. But I just keep thinking, with hundreds of thousands of protesters across the country, what would it say if our faith leaders were able to be present too? And I know some are. And again, I know it's super complicated with COVID right now. But what image would that send to the rest of this country if that were the case?
Yeah, definitely a very positive image. I'm going to ask the Imam to wrap up this question.
Yeah. So how faith-based communities can work together? So there are a few layers which we need to cover. First is, we are talking about bringing a national change and awareness, and which can't be done alone by one faith organization. So within one faith, first of all, there are so many denominations and different flavors of that faith. They all have to work together. I know that there is a big theological disagreement, but I guess on racism, we all are one that racism is bad. So once you do that, then second layer is that all the other faith-based organization, whether it's Muslim, Christian, Jews, and others, they all have to work together. That's the second layer. And I know that argument will come that, what will happen to disagreements? So see, we will have our disagreement, whether it's theological disagreement, philosophical disagreement, social values. We all have different values, but we might have our disagreement. But if we focus on the core issues which are similar, like we all are united against racism, no religion, Reverend, please correct me, no religion teaches us to be racist or take life of people in any circumstances, especially because of their skin color. Then we have to have one big voice, and we can then hope for a change. And then how to do it? I will actually say one of the sayings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the final prophet of Islam. He said, actually, there are three levels how you can change based on what kind of authority you have. First, he said, if you see a negativity in the society, any bad thing in the society, then try to stop that from your hand if you have the authority. When you don't have that authority, then the second level is try to change that bad habit from your speech. And if you don't have that authority, then at least feel in your heart that it is something bad. So we have to get together first and foremost within our faith-based and all the faith-based organization, and then we have to unite against this evil, which is racism.
Can I say one more thing, Hidayat?
Yeah.
I just, Dr. Tony mentioned, and I just appreciated him so much of what you said already, Dr. Tony, but you mentioned the 75-year-old man who was pushed down, the protester, and that they did do something with the police, they intervened. But I just want to name that, he was a white man, and they were pretty quick to discipline and to intervene on behalf of what happened to him. And I cannot tell you how many reports I've seen of Black protesters who've been shot with rubber bullets and sprayed in the face with tear gas and so much else, and nothing has been done. So I applaud that they intervened, but I can't help but say what you hadn't said, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I can't help but see that they were quick to act on behalf of a white man.
Yeah, no, you're correct. You can see the contradiction. You can see the discrepancy. But I think what's important is to see the brutality across the board by the police, whether you Black, whether you white, right? But of course, there's a privilege there, in terms of dealing with that. But just to see them just, just push this person who probably needs help going to the bathroom down on the ground like that, it hurt. Now, yes, it's double injury because of how they addressed it rapidly versus they push us every day. And nobody calls unless it's on video. And even when it's on video, they say, well, you saw the wrong thing, right? So you're absolutely right.
And so moving on to the next point, which I know that the Imam did touch upon earlier, how can parents educate their children on what is going on right now with the protests, racism, pretty much everything that is going on? And I'm going to start off with Dr. Tony.
Well, again, this is a teachable moment. And that I think sometimes we make the mistake to think that learning only happens at the universities, in the classrooms, and all that kind of stuff. That's far from the truth. It happens in the home. And so, but first of all, it has to be based on our values, how we behave, the way we treat each other, and the way we deal with our kids. So our kids, they learn from us, not just what we say, but what we say and do. And many times there are contradictions in terms of that difference, right? And so we have to also demonstrate respect and tolerance of all peoples. I don't care what you are, what your sexual preference is, or anything. Because when you do that at home, the kids will mimic it, right? They would take that somewhere else. So I think that it's also a question of values, as Dr. King talked about, a revolution of values, so that we are raising our kids to appreciate, humanity, and begin to expose them to things versus polluting their minds with a lot of the corporate nonsense that's being given to us, and it's called media, and it's called movies, and it's called music, right? I love films and I love music, but what is it that they're saying? What values are they perpetuating? We have to be able to censor some of that material in a sense to say no. And in fact, let me back up. We don't have to censor it. We have to have dialogue with our children when they hear it, because if they don't hear it around us, they're going to hear it around somebody else. How do they address it when they do hear it? Now, it's a question of it being appropriate, as Imam said, for his daughter, when he had explained that it was, one uncle doing something to another uncle. And then the daughter asked him to say, when she called you Omar, she says, could you explain a little deeper for me? You see, but we have to be sensitive based on how appropriate it is for them to try to understand, because they will have more questions. So it's a continuous process, but we have to live the life that we want our kids to live. Bottom line.
That's a strong point that you make, and I'm going to turn it to Reverend Brent right now.
Yeah, as someone who doesn't have children, I feel a little ill-equipped to speak to this. And I also just want to name that it's an area that I need to learn more about. I know, though, that there is something about children that they really cut through a lot of the veneer that we have in our language and in our actions. And they can cut through with, but why did you say that? Or why do we do that? Or why did they do that? And so being aware of those kinds of things, we as parents then have to be more mindful of what we're doing and how we're answering. And then not just how we answer, but then how do we back that up? If we say one thing, but then we live another way. Growing up, I didn't have a lot of Black friends. So I didn't, when my parents might have talked about not being racist or whatever, they didn't practice that in some ways, because they didn't expose me to other experiences and other people's experiences and other lives. And they didn't have those friends themselves. And so I didn't learn to have friends who were different than I looked myself. And so there are so many more things that I can't speak to about it. So I'll stop there and just name that it is an area that I want to continue to explore and learn about for that day if it comes for me.
Imam?
Yeah, Dr. Tony and Reverend put it in a brilliant way that, first of all, it's a very difficult question, honestly speaking, because I was just experienced this last Sunday. So I know that it gave me goosebumps when my daughter asked me this. I actually asked this question to one of the community therapists, Sister Imani Ali, who is a family therapist and specializes in mental health, that how do you communicate with the kids if they ask you this question about racism and about this incident and so forth. So you need to have a soft conversation on the basis of age of your child. So if you're talking to teenager, it will be different than when you're talking to toddlers. It will be extremely different. And if the kid's age is young, you can start talking to them by using metaphor. That there are some good people and then there are some bad people out there in the world, and if someone is bullying, you need to just step up and support, just like we saw that in one cartoon that happened. So similarly, you were going to connect the dots, but obviously in such a sensitive age, especially in young age, you don't want to expose them that obviously, as Dr. Tony said, this is the best time to teach. This is a best time, and at the same time, you have to select your style based on the age of your kid.
Idea. There's so much that just popped into my mind. I have to say this is that my guidance counselor in high school, a mother, had experienced the Holocaust. And she made it a point, and this was in high school. She took me to a house with her children. She had 4 children, her husband, her mother was alive then, and a family, and shared her family with me, her experience. And I can say up to the day that I'm still in touch with that family, and that family has been a part of my family. But it was her work, and in terms of, she led by example. And I've learned from her, because sometimes children would raise a question, they're ready for an answer. Now the question is, how appropriate do we engage them? Because we got to push them to continue to asking questions in order to answer, so we could really see that they're trying to comprehend and practice that. But it has to be based on our own consistency around doing that. But I want to acknowledge my guidance counselor, who had passed 1975, for being the example for me and her family. And she's had a wonderful impact. And this is a Jewish woman who, was in non-denominational, but, she stood with me from thick and thin. When I got in trouble, she came in trouble and got me out.
And so just the last question, quickly, a lot of you mentioned about how people should take this opportunity to educate themselves, to educate their children. And I just wanted to make the point that even after the abolishment of slavery, it is undeniable that racism is still deeply entrenched in our society. So what historical context and events can community members explore if they want to educate themselves on these troubles with race relationships in the United States? Just very quickly, starting with Dr. Tony.
Well, quickly, I think that we have to do our research, and we have to begin to look at programs that can give us real information. We have to go and talk to our elders. We have to talk to people who's knowledgeable. We have to do programs like this to raise mass awareness and consciousness. But we also need to insist that the institutions of education begin to present curriculums that address the history, so that people understand, because we can get into theological debates about the origins of this and that, right? But when it comes, and some of us may believe in science, but when it comes to DNA, it's a fact that we all come from, besides coming from God, we all come from Africa, right? And that we have a shared common ancestry. And when people don't recognize that, we got a problem. So we have to search for the truth. And sometimes that truth will hurt, especially when you've been told a lie.
Reverend Brett?
There are so many resources available, and a quick Google search can help people. There are podcasts that are helpful too, if you're into that, rather than reading. There are important documentaries on Netflix that you can watch to learn more about the history of oppression within our country, of oppressing Black people and other people of color too along the way. Think of Indigenous people and how they were treated too. I've started an engagement group with our congregation around Dr. Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I think that that's really helpful because it gives language instead of the sort of the default, you're either racist or not racist. Saying you're racist is bad, but saying you're not racist is very passive. You don't have to do much to say you're not racist. You just don't have to do the things that are blatantly racist to people. What Dr. Kendi does in his book, and Dr. Tony, I can't wait to read yours too. But what Dr. Kendi does in his book by saying racist and anti-racist, that's the dichotomy. It makes it active, one way or the other. You're involved and you're active. So even if you say you're passive, you're doing one or the other. So you have to actively work to be anti-racist. And I think that's incredibly profound and simple. And so then you remove the racist parts from the person and you're able to say, no, there are racist policies. There are racist systems in place that we've continued, that were put into place, maybe some of the things that you mentioned, but that continue, and we continue to vote for those. So what does it look like to vote for an anti-racist policy? And so it shifts the dynamic, and I can't recommend the book highly enough. It's heavy, it's hard. Maybe each of you have read it, but I think that's, just as one example that jumps out. It's not going to go into all the context exactly. It will, some, but it helps guide people into a proactive stance rather than a complacent, ambivalent, passive stance. And I think that's a lot of the problem, is that you have people who are going along with how things are because they can get by with that, and the system and oppression continue.
And any last examples you want to add, Imam Asif?
Yeah, first I want to actually thank you, Hadia, for doing an amazing job, and Dr. Tony and Reverend Brent. It was a pleasure to have, and especially even Rabbi Moshe, although he had to leave early. I actually spoke about this today in Friday service in our Wooster Islamic Center, that our Prophet Muhammad is actually a great example, because if you see the historical perspective, he in the Arabian Peninsula, it was known for the racism before his arrival. And just in the span of 23 years, he finished racism. And this is the best time for any society which is struggling from racism to see stories like Prophet Muhammad, to see stories like these activists who changed Nelson Mandela, to see these stories like MLK, and to get some inspiration, because you have to learn from how people have done in the past, and then you have to go about it.
And so I just want to close off with the statement from the Wooster Islamic Center and the Islamic Society of Greater Wooster, written by Brother Tahir, who's the media coordinator. So the members of the Islamic Centers, Wooster Islamic Center and Islamic Society of Greater Wooster in the Greater Wooster area, categorically condemn in the strongest possible terms the unfortunate incident that led to the demise of George Floyd in Minneapolis. We are deeply shocked to see a human being pinned down by the neck, gasping for air, saying, "I can't breathe," and eventually succumbing to his demise a few minutes later. The irony is twofold, especially when a law officer who took an oath to save lives is responsible for this manslaughter, while three other officers partners in crime remain complicit. George Floyd was unarmed, and apparently his only crime in the eyes of the white officer was that he was Black. Islam teaches equality. This is also emphasized by Prophet Mohammed, peace be upon him, in his last sermon. "O people, your Lord is one, and your father Adam is one. There is no favor of an Arab over a foreigner, nor a foreigner over an Arab, and neither white skin over black skin, nor black skin over white skin, except by righteousness." Our heartfelt concern and condolences to George Floyd and other such victims of racial tensions in the United States. We will remember George Floyd in our prayers. We pray for solace and patience for his family and loved ones. We pray that this racist mindset comes to an end. Although statewide Wide protests and support rallies stem from this incident. We pray that these demonstrations remain peaceful. And so quickly, each one of you can just give some last remarks that you want to make before we end this discussion. Starting off with Dr. Tony.
Yes. Well, first, Hadia, thank you so much for moderating this process. Thank you, Imam, for connecting with me. And it's good to meet you, Reverend Brett. This was very good. I think we need to continue to figure out ways in which we can work together in practice. I would say to everyone else is that this is the time for us to stand up for our values and to resist any form of oppression and to practice, our faith and what we believe in by demonstrating it to stand up for justice.
Reverend Brent?
Yeah, if I could encourage anyone who's listening and open to this conversation and to making changes, we're not going to, any of us, we're not going to be perfect at moving forward. It's going to be clumsy. We're going to mess up. But I think all of us ought to consider that it would be better to mess up in pursuit of justice and love of our neighbors, what is right and good, than to mess up by not doing anything at all.
Imam?
Actually, I don't want to add anything because whatever was in my mind, Reverend Brent and Dr. Tony already said. I just want to say sincere thanks to them and awesome job, Hadia. May God bless you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Hadia. Thank you, Imam and Dr. Tony.
Welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so I think we can end this. Yeah, okay. Thank you for joining again. Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.